Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont. Dark Souls 1 released 10 years ago, September 22nd, 2011. I've made a few videos about the game, but I've never reviewed it, so that's what we'll be doing in this video. This is not a sponsored video. Aside from the copy I received from Nintendo of Dark Souls Remastered on Switch, I've purchased all of the other copies myself, Xbox 360, and twice on Steam. Once the original, once the remaster. We'll go with a brief overview and then into the positives and negatives. Dark Souls originally released on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. Around a year later we got the PC version. Since then we've also had the remastered release on PlayStation 4, Xbone, and PC a few years back. But we're specifically going to be talking about the original release here. Dark Souls is a dark fantasy action RPG, a spiritual successor to Demon's Souls from 2009. The largest difference between the two being that Dark Souls ditched the hub and world structure for something closer to an open world experience, although it's best described as more of a semi-open world. Upon creating your character, you'll be prompted to pick a class, but this only determines your starting statistics and equipment. You could be a knight who then focuses on magic, or a sorcerer who becomes a heavy weapon wielder. There are no menu-based difficulty settings in Dark Souls, meaning everyone has the same base experience. Rather, difficulty is determined by your choices as you play through the game. There are online aspects that play into this. Summoning other players or NPCs is one option to give you an easier time, as is grinding for levels, improving your strength and the strength of your equipment if you so choose. Alternatively, you can play through the game at base level if you want to make it harder for yourself. Of course, Dark Souls is the game that popularized that particular brand of online play, whether you call it seamless multiplayer or any other term. Effectively, as you're playing through your single player game, you will see messages from other players, warning you or giving you helpful advice. You will see clues as to how they died. You will even see their summoning signs, allowing you to touch it and summon that player so you can adventure together for a short period of time. Likewise, under certain circumstances, you will be invaded by hostile enemy players, seeking to turn you into a popsicle, or you can invade them. Aside from this, Dark Souls also popularized a return to more streamlined gaming experiences. Cutscenes are scarce, instructions can be vague, and there's very little hand-holding. The observant player is rewarded, the careless player is punished. Whilst many have been put off by the reputation of being ultra difficult and hardcore, this isn't true in my opinion. From managing and upgrading your stats and equipment to the combat and everything in between, Dark Souls uses fairly basic systems. Indeed, the combat itself is quite straightforward. Sprinting, rolling, blocking, parrying and attacking are all based on a stamina system you need to manage, and of course there is depth to be explored and mastered. But should you compare the basic combat in Dark Souls to some other games, it is simple and straightforward. That said, enemies are aggressive and there's lots of traps in the world out to get you. Perhaps rather than being difficult, the game's reputation should be more that it is brutal, and not even unforgiving, because Dark Souls is very forgiving. Death is the last aspect that made Dark Souls unique after all, rather than a game over where you lose progress or are set back in some way. Death in Dark Souls has you dropping all your souls on your person and returning you to the nearest checkpoint. You can return to your bloodstain where you died and reclaim your souls, but if you die again, they'll be lost. So worst case scenario, you will lose some souls, but souls are infinite in Dark Souls. You can always get more. The game's tagline, "Prepare to die," shouldn't be taken as a warning, but rather as advice. Are you entering a new area clutching 100,000 souls? Well, perhaps you should spend them. Souls are the game's primary currency, used to level up your character, purchasing and repairing equipment, and so on. The basic stats are divided amongst things you would expect: stamina, strength, and whatnot. As for weapons, you can use spears, swords, greatswords, axes, maces, whips, daggers. Whilst the game has magic and other ranged options such as bows and crossbows, the emphasis is clearly on the melee combat. Bow gameplay is underutilized. Magic has historically been balanced poorly, being either broken or useless, with not much in the way of middle ground. Still, the game affords you a lot of freedom in how you build your character, with dozens of weapons and armor sets to play around with. Thanks to the game's scaling, a rather mundane longsword can be just as effective, if not more so, as a flaming magic sword you got from a boss, meaning that no matter what you pick, you can be effective. Everything is viable, for the most part. As for the story, thrust into a cursed world, you play as an undead character who, when they die, they will regenerate at a nearby bonfire, cursed with undeath, on a mission to link the fire and restore the world to a better state, ostensibly, perhaps even finding more about the curse in the process, maybe even a way to break it. The storytelling here is pieced together, with various NPCs giving you second-hand information, no reliable narrators to clearly explain what is happening. The world is full of flavour and details, however, from reading item descriptions to environmental storytelling, and of course the NPCs themselves. Items and such are rarely placed randomly in the world. If something is there, there's often a meaning for it. Sometimes that prompts further thought. Did you just find an item in a strange area? Well, if you read the description and think about it a bit, you'll probably come up with a reason as to why it's there. The story is non-intrusive though, you can spend as much or as little thought on it as you care to. Speaking of, let's move into the positives, as that's one of the largest for me. The world of Dark Souls is what drew me in so heavily. Given a superficial viewing, the game explains virtually nothing, just throws mystery after mystery at you. Why is this happening? Who was that? What's going on? But if you care to examine things closely, read all the descriptions, do all the NPC quest lines and such, slowly you'll have more of this fascinating world revealed to you in snippets and chunks. Combined with the game's excellent art style that holds up a decade later, it presents a dark fantasy world quite unlike any other. The joy in Dark Souls, for me, came from exploring this world, from Ash Lake to Anor Londo and everything in between. I never knew what treasure or danger would be waiting for me around the next corner, or behind the next invisible wall. The game's rather basic combat and subdued soundtrack help add to this atmospheric package. Whether or not that's a happy coincidence, I can't say. But if Dark Souls had the combat of, let's say, Devil May Cry, I wouldn't be so fixated on exploring the world, as my focus is on mastering techniques like jump cancelling and so on. The combat being as simple as it is allows me to focus on my surroundings and the environment. There is a great variety in those environments. Considering how geographically small the world is, if you were to walk from one end to the other, well, it wouldn't take you very long in Dark Souls. But during that you would see many diverse environs, from catacombs and demonic ruins, to golden cities, to the dreamlike foundations of the very world. Combined with the game's rather unique, at the time, online system and vast replayability, it was very easy to suggest paying full price for this game on launch. But that's not to say the game is perfect, by any means. So let's move on to the negatives. Naturally, there's Blighttown. The game's performance was poor on Xbox, PlayStation and PC. Whilst loading times were thankfully not too long, the frame rate was all over the place, capped at 30 on the consoles. Sometimes you'd be lucky if you were seeing 15, and on PC without DS fix it was resolution capped, or it was kind of a mess. Thankfully the game wasn't critically buggy. I say critically buggy because there are a lot of bugs and glitches in Dark Souls, but only through exploitation of the system would you really notice them. It's more things that experienced players will come across. They will know I can exploit the game in this manner or that manner. It's not really the case of, oh, I'm walking forwards and I just fell through the world and my save got deleted. There weren't many bugs to ruin your experience, let's say. Blighttown is Blighttown, has the worst performance. Very, very poor frame rate. There are other aspects of the visuals that can be rather painful or flat out bizarre. The game's lava is an eyesore. Each area had bespoke lighting, which means if you transition from one area to another, say Valley of the Drakes to Blighttown, you'll experience a very unnatural shift in lighting. Likewise, the game's balance was all over the place. It took the developers months and months to patch the Darkwood grain ring that absolutely dominated PvP. And at its absolute best, the PvP was never exactly what you could call fair or balanced, with the game's rather wonky netcode not helping matters. No security whatsoever, allowing hackers to run rampant on PC, and people with modified saves on consoles to invade you with 50,000 health or some other abnormalities, and nothing to really prevent them doing that either. There's also several bosses that are just complete chores, such as the Bed of Chaos, Ceaseless Discharge, and the Centipede Demon. What is it about Izalith and rubbish bosses? None of those are fun to fight though. They just feel like half-finished designs with absolutely hilariously broken hitboxes. People say Dark Souls 2 has bad hitboxes. Go fight Ceaseless Discharge and look at the hitboxes on his arm. Those are awful. Indeed, the second half of the game in general feels rushed and not complete compared to the first half. Perhaps this is owing to budget or time constraints during development. There are other small issues, but it says a lot about Dark Souls that it's very easy to overlook all of the game's problems. Even when suffering through Blighthound's 2 FPS, I didn't really mind it during my first playthrough. I was enjoying the game so much, after all. So whilst we should of course acknowledge these problems, many of which have thankfully been improved upon in subsequent sequels or re-releases, it's also important to mention that none of them really impacted the game too severely. At least not for me. Watching the franchise and games inspired by it evolve over the last 10 years has been a very interesting experience. I cannot wait to see how Elden Ring turns out, because Dark Souls definitely one of the most important games of the last 10 years, if you ask me. But how to rate it? Well, it's definitely one of my favourite games, but there are flaws. I think somewhere in the ballpark of 8 out of 10 is what I would give it. Beyond that, can I suggest playing it? Well, I imagine if you're watching this you already have, but absolutely. I think anyone who enjoys video games in any capacity will enjoy Dark Souls to some extent. And if you are a fan of exploring fantasy worlds, there's none better than Lordran.